have Councillor Campbell and Councillor Keebler. Thank you for joining us this morning. So I'm Russ Grayson, I'm the Chief Operations Officer. I will just help facilitate the meeting today. First agenda item is approval of the 12/22/21 meeting minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Look at that. Well done. All right, Kayla, do we have anybody for public comment?
I am not showing any hands at the moment.
All right. So why don't we just move into the first topic? So we have two topics on the agenda. The first one is regarding the removal of an old waterline bridge that Ryan Oster, who's our engineering director, will talk about. And then second after that is a more lengthy discussion on the tax exemption programs by Ali Platt, who's overseeing that initiative. So and that's all we have for today. So Ryan, you want to kick us off with the Fire Rock waterline bridge removal project?
Sure thing. Thanks, Russ. So let me get this in presentation mode here. So scroll back up. Everybody seeing that Fire Rock pedestrian bridge slide?
Yeah, Ryan, do you want to just go to display settings and hit the duplicate slideshow?
There we go. Thank you.
Well, now there you go.
Good?
Yeah, good.
Okay. So just wanted to bring this to this committee's attention. So thank you, everybody. Ryan Oster, engineering director / city engineer. We've over the last couple of years, we've been working up in this area, and to give it a little bit of background, I've got Jason and Autumn on the line here as well, so they can jump in and help me out if needed at any point. But a little bit of history and background here to show everybody kind of where we're at and what exactly we're talking about. So you may be familiar with the Archie Briggs Bridge, which is the southern one shown down here. Sorry. And just north of that bridge, about 1,500 feet on the downstream side, we have what we're calling the Fire Rock Bridge. So I'll have some other photos for you if you didn't know that there was a bridge there, because to be honestly, a few years ago, I didn't realize there was a pedestrian bridge there as well either. But this is O.B. Riley Road up here. This is the River West Neighborhood Association. And there's a little road here called Fire Rock Road that you can actually get through into this cul-de-sac, and you can access through an access easement to this publicly owned parcel, which is where one side of the bridge sits. But the other side of the bridge, after it spans the river, actually sits on this privately owned parcel by the homeowners association over there. So it's always been a bit of a contentious area, because technically the moment you step off this bridge on the west side, you are trespassing, but people do it all the time. And then they kind of weave their way up through these neighborhoods and they hit the Deschutes River Trail, which is just up here off of Archie Briggs. So it's been like this for a long time. We believe, as best as we can tell from the information we've gathered, this bridge was built in the mid-70s. And it was built by a private water purveyor at the time. And they built that bridge to help span the water service across the river to provide water on both sides. Since then, the city has taken over this water service area. And very recently, we have done some additional water work that has basically allowed us to not need this line anymore. So there is a water line that sits underneath this bridge. And we believe the bridge was primarily built to support the water line. It's hanging off of the bridge. And it just so happens that you can walk across the bridge as well. So it's been kind of dual used here for many, many years. But the city no longer needs that water line. It was aging, it wasn't working well, it was starting to leak. So we've done investments around the area and we no longer need that service. The bridge itself has been closed since 2015. So we've known for some time that this wasn't structurally sufficient and people shouldn't be accessing and utilizing this bridge. And you can see there's an example there of some of the signage and some of the other things that we've put up to try to deter people from doing it. some people may be deterred by that. Lots of people aren't. So it continues to get used. People just step over the chain or something like that. But again, we've had it technically closed since 2015. And as I noted, the water line underneath the bridge was damaged, no longer needed for service. So in 2020, we had consultant Jacobs kind of initiate the process of, well, how would we go about either removing or rebuilding, or what would the world look like? We just wanted to explore all of our options out there. And we were doing that as a part of another contract with service in the area. We had some other water and sewer service going on either side of this bridge. So we just kind of threw that in there as a side project. So they did an assessment of the bridge, and the next few slides are just going to be a few examples of some of the deficiencies. So you can see here, there's gaps in the boards that don't meet ADA requirements. The width of the bridge itself is not ADA compliant. There's no tow rail to keep things from sliding underneath it. There's nails popping, there's moss growing. It's a 50-year-old bridge at this point that's never been maintained. So you get the picture there. Missing deck boards and other things. Structurally, in terms of the foundation, we know the bearing plates and the nuts that hold all the joists together and the supports are not adequate. The reinforcement that you can see, these concrete columns, are not actually adequate for the load, and they're not structured and built into the surrounding soil or anything like that. There's an example of a stringer right there that's showing total failure. That thing is completely separated. By all definitions through the Federal Highway Administrations, we would classify this as a failing condition, and it's imminent failure. That doesn't mean I think it's going to fall tomorrow, but by all classifications, this should not be utilized anymore. So a few other examples there. Rail posts are falling and tipping over. It is only a matter of time, unfortunately, I think, before somebody who tries to utilize this will probably get hurt. And so another good shot. It looks pretty from a distance. It looks like a nice bridge if you hadn't been out there. But the continued use of this just poses a risk to the public, and it poses a risk to the city from a liability standpoint as well. As good as we may have marked this thing, we're still basically at the end of the day by default the owner of this thing. So the bridge remains closed today. The full-blown technical memo that we got from Jacobs, we gave to Kayla that you can certainly read through. Autumn and Jason helped put kind of an executive summary of that together that's only a few pages long. So I would at least encourage you to go read that. Very similar to what you're hearing from me today. But the bottom line is we don't believe this bridge should remain in place anymore. The question, I guess, maybe posed before this committee is, knowing that one side of this has public access, but the other side is private property. We know there's interested parties on both sides. The folks on one side who maintain the private property don't want people trespassing. The folks on the other side who like the public access would, of course, like to maintain some type of crossing here. But bottom line is, if we do want to do some type of future crossing, there's a lot of hoops we would need to jump through here. But the bottom line is, before anything else happens, the existing bridge as we know it today, it's beyond the point of even trying to fix what's there. We would recommend a full replacement if that's the way we want to go. But before we even get to that, do we replace it or not question, just wanted to bring it to this committee's attention that this bridge needs to just be removed. And there's a future discussion on whether or not we should replace it. I will jump back a slide here just to give a little context as well. From the Archie Briggs Road Bridge perspective, we are currently in the middle of a process right now. In fact, we're scoring this afternoon with ODOT to award the design of the Archie Briggs Bridge to a consultant team that would replace the Archie Briggs Bridge. And during that replacement process, that bridge would be built to accommodate future bikes, peds, and other multimodal. So in the short term, with this bridge needing to be removed, we would defer people to say, you need to go down to Archie Briggs, knowing, but that's not, I wouldn't say sufficient today. They don't have dedicated bike lanes or anything on the bridge, but we are about to initiate the design process. And long term, I believe Archie Briggs is the better answer. because as part of this design, we're also going to be using general obligation bond money to connect the Archie Briggs Bridge up to the Deschutes River Trail, which is up here just a little bit. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. We've already initiated, just to make sure we've done our homework to know what it would look like to go through the permitting process, get everything approved through the Army Corps of Engineers and every other agency would need to go through to get this bridge removed. But before we initiated that, we just wanted to bring that to the attention of this committee and some of the councilors and city staff. If we move forward with doing this, I anticipate you're going to start hearing about it from the public. It will quickly become a public conversation with, to be honest, and I'm not saying this is a west side, east side divide, but the private parcel owners are going to love it because they don't want people trespassing. But folks on the east side are going to not like it because they believe we're taking away, this scenic bridge that allows them to cross across Fire Rock and then gets up to the Deschutes River Trail.
And Ryan,
So, yeah.
can you also just elaborate on, because you did reach out to Parks, correct? Talk about this location?
Yeah, we did talk to Parks about this a year or so ago. They are not interested in inheriting the bridge as is. They would potentially be interested if the city took all the obstacles out of the way. If we installed a new bridge and we could somehow take care of the easement or private property issues, then of course they're going to say, well, great, thank you for this wonderful asset that's brand new, that has no easement issues. We would be happy to take that over from the city. But of course, that's a lot of effort and work on our end, including the cost of building a new bridge and working through this HOA to figure out how we would do some type of access easement. So no clear path ahead right now on how this might become a future safe crossing. But step one, I believe, in all of this is we do need to initiate the removal of the existing bridge for safety purposes.
So we just wanted to bring it to the attention of this subcommittee because, as Brian alluded to, from a staff perspective, we do feel the bridge should be removed. We just want to alert the subcommittee and see if you wanted to have any further conversations with council before we actually start to initiate that process. But from a safety perspective and a use perspective, the engineering says it needs to come out.
Can we ask questions, Russ?
Yep.
Please.
I guess one of my questions was, hi, Barb's dog. One of my questions was whether in the TSP update, I know Archie Briggs was talked about, did this little bridge factor into that as far as like crossings and transportation system for people walking?
No, I can confirm that, but I'm almost definite that this was not considered in any way, shape, or form in the TSP for a multimodal access point.
Okay, and then on the privately owned parcel, is that something that will eventually be developed? Is the neighborhood intending it to continue to be open space?
Yeah, and Jason, I don't know if you're still on, but he's had more direct conversations with this HOA, but my understanding, they're wanting to maintain it as open space to the river. This neighborhood is generally developed. It's larger lots. I don't think anybody's anticipating wanting to do anything major through that. But some zoning changes and other things that occur here in the near future may allow some redevelopment, but I don't think fundamentally they're looking to do anything different than what it looks like today.
So the a potential path forward to a future footbridge here would involve having to negotiate at least an easement through this open space for people stepping off the bridge. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That to date. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I can supplement kind of both of those questions that you had. As far as the inventory, a couple of years ago, the city requested the services of a consultant to go around the town and basically provide a structural inventory of every bridge that we had. This particular, the Fire Rock footbridge, was they were told to not even bother evaluating because we knew it wasn't structurally sufficient and it was just slated for removal. And so it wasn't actually ever documented at that time because it was just a foregone conclusion that it wouldn't be there and that we would need a new bridge there if we wanted to put one there. And then as far as the HOA's development ideas, this is just common area. There is a lot of common area throughout this Rimrock West neighborhood. They have no plans of developing this. It's a very native area. And we'll add that the majority of the roadway or residents out here are on septic. Silver Buckle is the one road that is on city sewer, which is where we have a CIP project, but the rest of it is on septic. There are, however, no drain fields on that common parcel, but there are common areas scattered throughout the entire area.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason. So even if they wanted to initiate some type of future development, they would probably be required to install the sewer main down Broken Arrow. And again, we'd work with DEQ, but yeah, they might not even have room for additional homes due to their septic tanks.
Yeah, I mean, part of asking that question was just, if there's some kind of plans coming up to do something else with this land that we could work with on them, but it doesn't sound like that's the case at all.
No.
So.
And also being in close proximity to the river, there's other requirements within the water overlay zone for building, whatnot. So there's a lot of permitting regulations that are required for any development within the area.
Yeah, and Jason, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I don't know if you've looked at it. I'm pretty sure there's those roads, they probably do not have public access easements on them to begin with. So even if we could get people across the bridge through that open space parcel, in theory, those are private roads that don't have public access on them either. So it is a much bigger conversation with that neighborhood if that is a desire in the future to try to get that. And I don't know if that would be a fruitful engagement as well
Right.
with what we've heard today.
And Russ, that's correct. The roadways out there are private. They are maintained by the HOA. The city does have a utility easement over the platted right of way, but they are owned and maintained by the HOA. And they're definitely not built to any city standard.
To know.
So I guess we just want to check in with council to see if there's any concerns around this before we start moving forward, and or if there's any other larger conversation or updates we want to provide to council around this, either through Eric's memo or actually some type of work session. As Ryan alluded to, there'll probably be some public comments around this once they get wind of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And we haven't done any type of large scale notification. Just kind of the property owners on either side of it are aware in the HOA. So we haven't publicly gone out and done a larger notification that we're considering the removal of this. So you just feel like once we do that, it will start the conversation, and we didn't want council or this committee to be surprised that we may be initiating that.
Councilor Campbell?
On the east side, the publicly owned parcel, who owns it?
I think what's the official? I think that's literally what it says in the county mappings. It just says publicly owned. It doesn't say
public.
Yeah, the public.
The public.
It doesn't specify the city or the state or whoever. It just says the public. So by default, okay, that's us.
All right, you guys, you found a 9 a.m. puzzle for us. Holy hairdo. You just make this stuff up. Okay, this is my only, comment is that building in, around, on, over a river is, to be able to do that outright is quite problematic. But because there's a bridge there, we might be able to repair the bridge that's already there. That bridge might be grandfathered in or something.
Sorry. No, the bridge as it exists today is beyond repair. We can.
No, I understand that. But I'm just saying that because it is there, it might be possible to put a new one in without all of the regulation if we were to just be putting a bridge where no bridge has ever existed. Do you see what I'm saying? I know sometimes that's how things work in the world. Something is grandfathered in. If you leave, one of the concrete piers, you can claim, do you know what I mean? Then you can claim that you're not replacing the bridge. We're just repairing. But, all of that said, I just don't see why we even want to hold on to the ability to have a bridge right there when the one side is privately owned and they have no desire to change the situation. They're never going to say yes to, we'd like to put a pathway from that bridge up to the river trail. As you said, from that bridge to the river trail is all private roads where they just don't want the rest of us in their neighborhood. I mean, it seems to me like, yeah, bridges just got to go.
I'll just add to that, Barb, in the eyes of the permitting agencies, there is no grandfathered, or because there was a bridge there at one point, it's easier in the future. That's not the case. They don't look at it that way. So it could be 100 feet downstream, 100 feet upstream. It doesn't have any precedent for, because it was here at one point, it's easier in the future. So
great. Thank you, Jason. That's helpful. Yeah, I think it's got to go. I wish the homeowners, whoever they are on the privately owned, would ask us to take the bridge away. And then we could say, that, this homeowners association wants us to get rid of it because it's on their private property. But, that would just make the politics of it a little easier, that we're not just taking away an asset,
Well, they do. Yeah, their message to us through Jason and others is that bridge needs to come out because you're allowing people to trespass on a private property.
So there you go. I would say, we want to, make that clear that, we're that.
So
yeah, the board strongly encourages us to take the bridge away. They're our biggest advocate. I'll say that.
So Councilor Keeler, just want to check in with you. Are you kind of in the same feeling?
I think Councilor Schenkelberg wanted to ask a few questions too. So I'll wait.
Is she on? I didn't see she on.
Yeah, I think not necessarily any questions, but just a way that we can make this really tangible and simple to explain, because I think that we all kind of have the general knowledge around why this is such a complex subject, and how do we talk to kind of all of the people surrounding it about how can we make it as clear as possible why, besides the safety piece, is kind of the thing that's coming to me. And also my comment, I didn't really have any questions. It sounds like we've been looking at this bridge for a while and that it's not sound and that we don't want people falling in the river and getting hurt.
Well, yeah, Rita, and that you bring that up, it's a good point, is from an engineering perspective, we feel like there's a very strong argument for the removal without needing it to be this publicly owned versus privately owned, trespassing, HOA versus homeowners. From a pure, if we want to keep it simple, this thing is structurally deficient and it's going to fail. It's technically already failed. It needs to be removed. And it really doesn't need to be any more complex than that.
Yeah, so just so council's, our next steps would be for Ryan to work with his team to initiate basically an RFP to get that bridge removed. Correct, Ryan? We'd get a proposal out there.
Yeah, we've got, Jason's already worked through a lot of the permitting side of the process. So yeah, we would need to sit back down and see where we are. But yeah, that's logically the next step is we would need to hire a company and put something together to get that removed in a safe manner.
The removal process is going to be quite visible because there is no easy way to get in there. So you can't get a truck down in there. So I guess one of the things we want to ask, if the subcommittee is okay with us moving forward, is, we can work with our communications teams to look at outreach options. Do you want us to, in what communication, if any, do you want us to bring back to council, or do you just want us to kind of give updates through the city manager's weekly memo on kind of where we are in the process and the next steps?
So, I would say I agree with Ryan. To me, this is just a safety issue. We can't let this continue to be there knowing people are going to walk across it and potentially get hurt. That's the number one thing for me. I think there could be a future conversation about a bridge in this area, but that's going to have to happen in the future. And the immediate need right now is just to make it safe. So, and I just I don't know if you saw my face when some of those pictures were coming up. If there's any way to communicate when you're telling people, hey, here's the safety issues with those visuals of how the bridge isn't even on its foundations really anymore, I think that'd be helpful. So
Okay.
that's the thing for me. And I think as far as coming to council, I feel like city manager report's probably fine with all the work that has gone in to show that this is not repairable. And I think we would lead with saying safety is the #1 issue here. But there also is a complication that when it was built onto private land without any kind of easement, you know, so that's something that needs to be figured out before any bridge could go back there. And that, again, I would say is a future conversation. The other piece I would put with it is if you can have some clear information about what's happening with the Archie Briggs Bridge
Yeah.
and when that's expected to come in with the pedestrian improvements, that might help people understand, yes, we're taking this away for safety issues, but there will be another path and an improved path for you in the future. And just letting people know when that's going to happen might be helpful as well.
Okay.
So what we can do, we can ask Ryan and his team to update the memo based off of this conversation, include that information, include the kind of the structural analysis report, get that to Eric, we can get that out. And then once we know what the plan of attack is to remove the bridge, we can bring that information back through the city manager's memo as well and just keep everybody updated. And then we can all, if the subcommittee wants, we can work with our communications team to see what would appropriate outreach be as we get closer to that removal date, just so we don't catch people off guard.
I think it would be really great because I guess I didn't ask this question, but I'm assuming most of the people that are coming over that bridge are people that live in that area and kind of go walking to connect down to the trail. I'm assuming it's not like people drive into that neighborhood to cross over that bridge, right? So
Correct.
it seems like you could do some local address outreach before removal happens so that people don't walk up to the bridge that they're used to going across and see, oh my gosh, there's stuff happening here. I think that would be really great.
Yeah, the footprint of the influence area, it actually does extend to the east of O.B. Riley. There's quite a bit of single family homes over there that we hear folks just cross O.B. Riley and then walk down to their, so yeah, it's not citywide, I don't think, but we would work with Ann and kind of figure out what that would look like.
We can put some additional notices on the bridge, maybe to with the QR code, just some information as well that people can research what's going on if they're interested. So we'll look at those avenues as well.
Yeah, can we put more signs that this isn't safe? Like more.
We'll make it like Wile E. Coyote, right? Back in the Roadrunner days.
I might be inclined to think that because the thing's been closed for years. There have been signs and a chain up for years. You know, I might be inclined to say that notice on the bridge itself is sufficient and we don't need to go knocking on doors, you know, giving people information that they did not have before that's liable to make them upset. That, you know, because they already can't use the thing. The thing has been, or they shouldn't be. They should not be, you know, sneaking underneath the chain to use it. So we're really not taking anything away. We're not taking, you know, it already doesn't exist as a bridge. You know, it's not safe. There are chains up telling people to stay off of it. So, you know, that's just a comment. Either way.
Okay.
Okay.
I just kind of wanting to err on the side of like over communication, because even though if people have been doing it for years, then we just want to be like really sure that there's like, they come down the trail or whatever, and then there's like all of our stuff and they're like, what's happening? It's like the bridge that was going to be gone for years is now finally leaving kind of piece.
Well, and we will work with our communications team to figure out how to get that appropriate, what the different methods of outreach could be on that, just to make people aware.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on this topic? This was the easy one, just so you know.
Can we set it on fire and it'll be training exercise for the fire department?
Probably not over the river, Councilor Campbell. Sorry.
It's not even pressure treated lumber.
We could remove it somewhere.
Pollution.
We could remove it to like a safe parking lot area or training facility, maybe put it on fire there, but
Put it on fire there.
No extra fire, zero extra fire. The thing we do not need in this area is more fire. Not
we were calling it the Indiana Jones Bridge for a while. That was the internal name for that bridge.
Yeah.
That would be the best like press release type theme. And
we'll see what we can do there. All right. All right. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Jason. So next topic is just an update on the tax exemption programs. I'll just preface this as you're going to get a lot of information here. This is because it's just these programs kind of have a lot of kind of important material on it. As you go through, ask questions. Allie and Lynn are here to help guide you through and kind of asking for, they'll tell you what we're asking from the subcommittee for today. And there'll be more conversations on this as we go through. So Allie, we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to turn it over to Lynn for the introduction. So Lynn, Amy, and I are going to co-present this presentation. I think you're familiar with all of us, but Allison Platt, Core Area Project Manager.
Lynn McConnell, Housing Director.
And Amy Fraley, Affordable Housing Coordinator.
And Kayla, while Allie is pulling up the presentation, if you don't mind moving Kathy Austin over to being a panelist. She is one of our work group members and is going to jump in at times to just provide a little more color to our presentation. So we have 3 potential property tax exemptions that we wanted to run through with you at this point, get a little bit of feedback, and we'll walk through sort of what we're looking for. So here's today's agenda. Initially, when we spoke with you at work session a few months ago, it's all blending together, so I can't remember quite when that was, we brought to you 4 potential property tax exemptions to review. We'll talk to you about what we've done on that so far, sort of where staff recommendations and work group recommendations are lining up, a little bit more about what we've heard from other taxing districts, and then ideally get a little direction from you all about where to go from here. Okay. So here's where we are in the schedule. Fresh, hot off the presses since yesterday, we have been cranking. There have been several meetings each week on this topic, I'll say that, but we are still pushing forward quickly, and today, February 23rd, is our checkpoint. We do hope to have a work session in April with you with the idea of potentially adopting some of the priority property tax exemptions in May. We may stagger the implementation of some of these just because of staff capacity, but we'll get into that more in a sec. Okay. So here are the questions. We're not asking for answers to these right now, but we are hoping that through today's discussion, we get some of these answers from you. So we will be looking at 3 programs today in detail: nonprofit, MUPD or multiple unit, and middle income. And we want to make sure that we are still on the right track with all 3 of these, with each of you making sure that we're still moving in the right direction. Everybody's still supportive of our work on this. We will talk about staggered implementation because of capacity, and wanted to just check in with you and make sure again that we're on the right track with that. There are some considerations, particularly in our core area with TIF revenue. So TIF is the revenue, you will remember, and Allie will go through this in more detail. We have our frozen tax base in the core area. Any TIF that is collected in the next 30 years is set aside in sort of a special pool that can be used for the projects that were identified through the core area board and council for prioritization. We don't want to reduce the amount of TIF revenue that we have too much. So that is a fine balance that we'll talk you through later. And that's really what the question is are we looking in the right sort of framework for how we're making that balance of TIF revenue versus tax exemptions and getting development moving? And then finally, in part because of the feedback we've gotten from other taxing districts and from the work group, we're really talking through some potential caps, whether that's financial caps or unit caps, but how many of these exemptions do we want to award before we decide that, you know, we've done what we need to do, the program's working, let's hold tight. So that's really what we're looking at, is sort of what that right level is. So these, we'll come back to these questions, but wanted to give you a sense of what we were going to be looking to you for during this presentation. Okay. Next slide. So taxing district outreach. So we have met with a variety of different taxing districts, including ESD, the county, 911, the sheriff's office, parks and recreation, COCC. We are still working on getting a meeting set with the library. They've been a little harder to pin down, and school district. So combined taxing district outreach has produced some of these talking points that we wanted to work through with you. Without a doubt, what we are trying to do is to create more development with these property tax exemption programs. The trade-off to that is more need for services from all of our taxing district partners. And so they wanted to make sure that you all were aware of that balancing act, that what we're doing is actually bringing more work to them while, from their perception, taking away some of their revenue. And so just awareness. TIF impacts was something that they were very concerned with. So again, we'll get back into the details of that in the MUPD program. What is success? When is enough enough? And so these are things that staff is working through with the work group as well. And the unit caps or financial caps that we'll talk about are part of the response to that. I think that the taxing districts didn't always see the big picture of why we needed these. And so that was another thing that I think is important for you all to know, that I don't know that folks really felt, all of them, like we needed to incentivize development in the way that we're looking at. This is an ambitious program. Maybe what we're getting is enough in the core area or elsewhere. And so that was a concern. So the next question about priority for middle income residents is a huge topic with big fair housing implications. But the question is, can we prioritize taxing district staff for these amazing programs that we're creating? And I wish that the answer was yes. But sadly, because of fair housing implications, there's actually some significant work that would need to be done. Staff are doing that work because of the DSL parcel and the education district housing that is slated for the DSL parcel or Stevens Road that we're creating concept plans for right now. But today, I do not feel comfortable saying yes to this question, that we could prioritize certain taxing district staff for these units that are created for a variety of reasons, but primarily having to do with a tenet of fair housing law called disparate impact, and the fact that we are a very homogeneous community. And so prioritizing the folks who are working and who are also homogeneous may not meet the intent of fair housing. That is, hours of discussion summarized into basically one statement. So I'm oversimplifying hugely, but did want to kind of give you a hint on that one. And then I think really looking at the public benefits that we're creating as part of this, or asking for as part of these programs, to really tie into the biggest needs that our taxing districts have, such as affordable housing and childcare, et cetera. So this is a brief summary, and you'll hear more. Councilor Campbell, I appreciate you coming with staff next week on our first outreach. I think it's next week on our first outreach visit to the Bend Park and Recreation District Board. Okay, next slide. So with the work group, I think I'm handing it back over to Allison, unless you want me to keep going, Allie.
Yeah, if you why don't you keep going on the work and hand it over to Amy for nonprofit.
Yeah, so the work group is a work group that was staff appointed, and they are here to advise us. So we really did our best to get a wide representation of participation from different groups, and know that while not every committee is listed, we have engaged with other committees. So we have visited the climate committee and gotten some really great feedback that you'll see from them later in this presentation. We're also working closely with Anna Allen. She did not have an HREC member that was quite ready to commit to these meetings, but we're making sure that they're in the mix as well. So continuing to look through some of the details of this program and trying to get the broadest representation possible. One other note is that we really kind of opened the doors to this work group, I'll say. And so there was a lot of interest from certain committees, which is great. We feel like that really contributes to the overall discussion and will lead to a better program overall. We did require that each group only has one voting member on the committee, so that we're not sort of pushed in one direction by somebody having a larger group of members. But we do feel like the discussion is viable with a lot of members, and that makes a better product. Okay. So with this, and Allie, just jump in if you tell me. I'll keep going.
I can take these next
okay.
two slides.
Thank you.
So the general input that we've been getting from the work group so far that we wanted to check in with you all on is we presented to them 4 different tax exemption programs, and they've recommended kind of with staff recommendations as well, that we prioritize 3 of the 4 programs for near-term adoption. And we actually originally came to them with a proposal for just moving forward 2. and recommending that we hold off on middle income and get the first two, the multiple unit property tax exemption and the nonprofit tax exemption program up and running. But they really felt like all three were needed and would have benefit and value, and to keep pursuing all three, even if we needed to pursue sort of staggered implementation just due to staff capacity and resources. And so they wanted to see all three be sort of a prioritized for adoption, but then stagger implementation as needed. And we kind of the work group and staff all agreed that we did not need to continue to pursue the vertical housing development zone program. And a couple of reasons for that. So the VHDZ program is really focused on mixed use development because it has a 50% non-residential use on the ground floor requirement. And so it's also very state statute driven. There's not a lot of flexibility for the local jurisdiction to sort of tailor the requirements for this program. It's very like state statute dictates exactly how the program needs to be established and run. And we felt like we could get the benefits of sort of that encouragement for a mixed use project on certain streets where we would focus this program by just writing that into the requirements into a MUPD program, because MUPD allows the city to tailor and write their own eligibility requirements. So we felt like we could get the benefits of the VHDZ program by just writing those requirements into a future MUPD program and be even more flexible than we could by just pursuing a VHDZ program. And then Kathy, if you have anything to add onto any of this, feel free to jump in.
Oh, thanks, Sally. I appreciate that you were open to including the middle income tax exemption from the beginning. I brought up the fact that many multi-unit and nonprofit projects have other sources of funding, whereas middle income has none. And so at least letting people know this is coming down the pike, even if it wasn't able to be implemented right away, might encourage people to consider moving forward with this type of housing. But we acknowledged also that it's probably not going to be in the central area, that it's more appropriate to be dispersed throughout the city. And it wouldn't have a negative impact in terms of the TIF by not being in the central core. So thank you for being open to including that. And I think it's just really important moving forward. And I acknowledge what Lynn is saying regarding the problem with fair housing by targeting this, but having more of this type of housing is the kind that's going to help our young professionals and teachers and our essential workers in town. And so I felt it was really important to move that one forward. So just want to say thank you for that. And that was my input. So that's all I really have to say.
Yeah. And then some other feedback that from the work group is just a general concern about using tax exemption programs, particularly in the core tax increment finance area, because it does have impacts to future TIF revenue and sort of what is the appropriate balance there, and would it make more sense to consider other development incentive tools? And I think that's work that staff is sort of a good question to be asking, and a question that we sort of want to check in with you on. We are still in the process of sort of developing kind of case studies to help inform the answer to this question and reviewing other development incentive tools. But we still feel like there's opportunity to support pioneering investors with an exemption program. But there are ways to potentially limit the impacts to TIF. And that might be something that we come back to you all on with more information, depending on how the conversation goes today. There's also have been discussions at the work group about ways to limit or cap the program with either a housing unit goal or count, or some sort of annual maximum. And I think just general desire to tie that to some sort of housing goal is a theme that has been coming up with the work group. And then they do have some specific comments, particularly on the middle income exemption and the multiple unit property tax exemption, that we'll talk through when we go through each of the exemption programs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy to talk about the nonprofit tax exemption.
Thank you, Ali, and good morning. The nonprofit tax exemption is fairly straightforward. It's also very flexible, so the city can determine the criteria. Some of the highlights is that there is no unit minimum, which means that we may be able to fill some of those middle housing in the form of duplexes and triplexes and fill that need. And also the length of affordability, or the length of the exemption, can be the length of the affordability. And I think everybody's seen this slide, so we can move forward. We do have an example here, which is a Kobo Duplex from this fall that opened up. And you can see that the monetary amount or the cost of the city and the county is fairly low. It is strictly for nonprofits. So in addition to some churches that may own property, we'd be looking at Kobo, Core Community Land Trust, Habitat. And this exemption does include land held for development, which is unique. And we can go forward. The recommendation of the work group is that it is citywide in any area that is annexed, which would allow for churches and other nonprofit agencies the flexibility for siting. And I'm the quick and easy one.
Are there any questions on nonprofit before we sort of move forward to middle income?
Is this one that's been implemented in other cities?
Many other cities. It's
right
throughout the state. So we do have some examples of cost to municipalities as well, which we can talk about in the context of the caps if you'd like, and the number of properties or projects that have been used or implemented.
Okay, middle income. Next, please. So middle income, we didn't go through the slide, the little house slide that shows the AMI levels, because I think you all have seen that a lot. But in principle, this is what we're talking about with middle income, is the level just above deed restricted affordable housing, up to about 120% of AMI. So if it's not going to be true deed restricted affordable housing, and it is available to folks making 120% of AMI and under, it may be eligible for this program. So this is new construction or a rehab, which is health and safety related remodels. And the formula here is weird, and that's what we'd like to talk to you about on the next one, if it's okay, next slide. The way that Tillamook County does this is through, actually, I'm gonna hold that for a sec. This is another local option and would be a full exemption on development. Carry on, sorry, next one. Okay, here we go. So the work group recommended, we don't want to give away the entire city, frankly. And so extending this to detached single family does not seem to the work group like the right thing to incentivize. When we are looking at what to incentivize and what we need more of, largely that is multifamily and middle housing types. Again, middle housing types are what we also call as the missing middle. That is different than what we're talking about when we're talking about middle income. So middle income is the people, middle housing is the type, the product type, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to clarify that because sometimes those words get mixed up in folks' minds. So we would be looking at extending this to middle housing types, which would support House Bill 2001 implementation as well as to multifamily. The work group, as I started mentioning, wasn't thrilled with the formula that we came up with, or that Tillamook came up with, which is a maximum of 10 years of property tax exemption. And your length of exemption is tied to the percentage of units in a development that fit this middle income definition. Thanks, Sally. The way that Tillamook does it is if you have 10% of your units that meet this middle income definition, you get 10% of the full property tax exemption, which is 1 year. If you have 50% of your units that meet this middle income definition, you get 50% of the property tax exemption, which is 5 years. Obviously, the development size means that the benefit will be scaled very differently for larger developments that get a 1-year exemption versus smaller developments that get a 10-year exemption. So I think that there was a lot of interest in the work group in playing with this formula a little and making sure that we were maximizing the benefit that we got, which is a deed restriction and affordable housing or more affordable housing, while not giving too much away, if that makes sense. So they really wanted to look at creating minimums for the percentage of units or the number of units, leading to how long that tax exemption lasted for. So they want to be a little more hardcore than Tillamook. Is really what it comes down to. So these are very much still in draft form. What you can see for the potential option with a 10-year length is based on the total property taxes and a percentage of that would be exempted. So we would kind of do a different formula, which is all within our control. And this is very much still a work in progress. I think the question for you all today is whether you feel comfortable sort of detouring and looking a little more creatively, which is still underway, at how long this property tax exemption would last and what we are asking developers to provide. Does it feel fair, for instance, to use the Tillamook criteria on, let's say, a 100-unit development that's going to provide 10 units for affordable, only gets 1 year of property tax exemption, whereas another development that would provide those same 10 units could get a full 10 years. And sort of what does that look like? So I think we would propose this sort of minimum number of percentage of units in order to even hit that threshold to be able to qualify. And then we would look for the full 10-year deed restriction really on all of these, but only scale the amount of dollars that were being exempted, if that makes sense. So I'm not sure if I'm explaining as well. I'm seeing Councilor Campbell is looking a little confused, so that's making me worried. So I'm just going to pause for a sec and see what questions are arising.
If I understand what you are saying about the Tillamook, is that the way it is structured, there's no incentive for an absolute number of units. So 10% of 100-unit complex gets you the same number as 100% of a 10-unit complex.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
Aren't we incentivizing that same thing with what we're looking at, where you still, because it's tied to the percentage of units?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you're really helping me figure out what I haven't said or explained well. So thank you. Great question. So the difference, I think the main difference here is what the work group felt is that a 1-year deed restriction was not enough for how much we were offering in return, which was a full exemption of property taxes for even just that 1 year. So they want to make sure that we are maximizing that deed restriction up to the 10-year, maximum 10-year timeframe that we put. And that's actually a major reason why we were looking at a revised formula here. And so 10-year deed restriction would be more or less required for any of these developments. And then the amount of dollars that they got exempted would be based on the percentage of units total. So that this kind of evens it out for those smaller developments and those larger developments to have some proportionality for how much was being exempted, while our sort of minimum standards and what was most important to the work group, which is the deed restriction, was maximized. Does that help a little? I'm sorry, it was a long night, so if I'm not as clear as I was hoping, I apologize.
I think one of the main point to take away is that we can only ask for the deed restriction of middle income for the length of the exemption. And so right now, Tillamook County's formula doesn't really incentivize the developments to maximize that length of the middle income deed restriction. And so we'd like to pursue a formula that maximizes the length of the deed restriction, but then tailors the percentage of exemption that we give, if that makes
sense. That does make sense. So, that problem of absolute number of units is still there. We're still haven't got a way to incentivize somebody building 20 units versus only building 10 units. But we do have a way to incentivize that however many units they are, they're affordable for the full 10-year exemption. Okay, look at me go. What time? Second cup of coffee.
So So Lynn,
And
also,
Melanie,
oh,
can
sorry.
I'm
Go ahead.
sorry, Melanie. And can I just extend one? So this is different than the one where the exemption could go longer than the 10-year, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So,
Okay.
yeah, so Councilor Campbell, the nonprofit exemption that Amy just ran through, that's the one with, in theory, a permanent property tax exemption because those affordability timelines are so much longer. And so we would lock that in. Basically, your exemption is there with nonprofit for as long as you are affordable. This one, the middle income one, we are limited by state statute to that 10-year time frame. So we can't really extend it beyond that.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, so Lynn, I was going to say it makes sense to me to want to keep the longest term possible to incentivize. And to me, the formula you've put up here does actually encourage people building more units to take advantage of this, right? Because they know it's going to last 10 years, even if it's a lower percentage, if they only do 25% of their large, number of units. Whereas in Tillamook County, like you pointed out, if I'm building a large amount of units and I know I only can do 10% as middle income, I wouldn't bother going for just a 1-year tax exemption. That doesn't seem worth it. Why not just make them all market rate? So I like this formula a lot more, and I think this is a good direction to go. And to me, this is sort of the flip side of inclusionary zoning, where you are requiring, hey, you have to make X percentage affordable housing. This one is saying, hey, we're incentivizing you to get an advantage if you do even just do 25%, but also for those affordable home developers that want to make a middle income development, they could go 100% of the units and get a larger exemption. So this makes a lot of sense to me.
Councilor Kobo, I think you really hit on it. This is an incentive-based program, and this is where it's kind of fun, I'd say, as government to try to determine what are the right things to offer up to get what we want in return. And so, yeah, that's exactly it, is trying to hit that balance. So, and then before we move to the next slide, I just want to make sure that Councilor Schenkelberg didn't have anything to add. I didn't want to bowl you over and keep going if there was anything you did want to say.
No, just trying to conceptualize the general knowledge that is being shared. So possibly needing additional follow-up, but right now, yeah, just feeling excited, and the breakdown is helpful for me with all of the percentages. It makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. So we will continue to work on this formula. It's really great to have your direction on sort of how we're framing it out and look at some specific pro forma examples. That may change that formula just a little, depending on sort of what we find in the market with what folks need and what they're willing to do. So just know, really helpful to have that sort of framework established. So the proposal here is that it would be citywide. This is limited to units for rent, though folks, yeah. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, single family detached, the staff proposal is to not allow for that because that's not the housing type that we need to incentivize in this market right now. And really looking at sort of what that might look like in that central area. So how do we incentivize more dense housing? I think there was concern from the work group that if we were using this middle income property tax exemption for middle housing types, that might actually de-densify the central area, if that makes sense, because really the density levels that we're looking at in that central area are more than middle housing in a lot of places. But we also wanted to have it as an opportunity for those really small lots where a handful of townhomes, for instance, might make sense. So finding that balance with the work group as well. But I think that the main point here of not extending this to detached single family and to allowing it citywide is the important element that we wanted to check with all of you. And then what you're looking at here on the right, you've probably seen in various different contexts before. That's our housing mix and what we've permitted in 2000 versus in the more recent years, where you're really seeing that shift away from single family into middle housing. And that's been the result of, and into multifamily, the result of policy changes that you and your predecessors have been making over the years, really over the last decade or so, to try to incentivize those housing types. So it's working, and we hope that these incentives continue to push that balance in that direction as needed. Okay.
Lynn, what's the thought on units must be for rent versus a homeowner model? Is that just because that's the way you monitor if it's remaining affordable, or?
State statute. Yeah, so just FYI, quick side note is that there was a property tax exemption created last year in the legislature for land trusts. So that is not a local option. It is, in my understanding, by right. So we won't actually get involved in that one, but do know that those types will be covered by that land trust exemption that were passed. So we're not leaving homeownership out. It's just covered in a different place.
Great. That's exactly what I was thinking of, was the land trust model. So that's good to hear.
Yeah. Next slide. Any other questions before we move to the complex one? Oh no, sorry, Councilor Campbell. Get your coffee refilled if you need it. All right, thanks, Allie.
Okay, I did take out all the crazy number graphics, and if you want them, I'll come back to you for another presentation with all the crazy numbers. So I'm going to kind of give a high level overview of where we're at with multiple unit property tax exemption, the MUPD program. So again, this, I think you have gotten the overview of this program, but again, the program's adopted by ordinance and each individual project would be approved by resolution. Just the improvements, but not the land, is tax exempt for up to 10 years. We could also structure the program where affordable or low income portions of the exemption could be extended beyond 10 years. But we haven't come up with the staff recommendation to do that yet, where we're headed with the program currently. Again, 51% of the combined levy of the taxing districts have to agree by board resolution in order for all districts to participate in this exemption. We've been doing a lot of research in response to kind of concerns from overlapping taxing districts about what other cities do. So there are 4 city programs in Oregon that use the multiple unit property tax exemption. And this is just an example of the Salem program. So their program was established in 1976 and recently extended out to 2032. It had an original sunset or a previous sunset in 2021, but they decided to keep extending the program. They've seen 10 total projects be approved in its 45 years of existence, which have helped incentivize 708 residential units. The way that their application process works is that applicants approach the city first for an application and then go to the school district. Following that, we would potentially rewind the process where we would have the applicant reach out to taxing districts first and then come to the city last. That's what we currently do for our nonprofit tax exemption. For the public benefit requirements for Salem's program, what they do is they have a list of 19 public benefits, and a developer must meet one requirement from that list of 19. And if the project has over 100 units, then the developer must meet 2 of the criteria or provide 15% of the units at an affordable level. So that's just one program that we've reviewed to kind of just give like a deep dive into one. What we've been kind of hearing from our work group related to this program is that there's a desire to tailor the public benefit requirements based on sort of the geographic or market conditions throughout the city of Bend. So we acknowledge that some areas of the city are not having as much of a hard time producing multifamily or multi-unit developments for higher rents or rates than other parts of the city where we're really trying to incentivize, such as the Bend Central District. And so is there a way that in stronger market areas where we are seeing this development type move forward without sort of any issues to make the requirements to meet this exemption program harder to meet? There's still generally a concern about the impacts of tax increment finance revenue in projects in the core area. And I think that probably merits a larger discussion with you all that we can come back with a lot more details on. And then there's a desire to require, public benefits through this program that would meet, the city's community goals, so housing goals, childcare goals, environment and climate goals. And then, but there are sort of mixed reviews from the different work group members based on sort of their, their interest hats, I would say. And so I think there's a balance to be considered by you all when we do bring forward sort of draft recommendations. When we did present to the Environment and Climate Committee, they did have some really good input into some of the public benefits that we're considering for this program, and really asked that we be as aggressive as we can to meet climate goals with this program without making the program unusable. And obviously there's a delicate balance to strike there that we're still reviewing and analyzing as staff, but they recommended some of the energy efficiency requirements could be either being 10% above the sort of building code minimum, or meeting the REACH energy code. Or another option could be the project is either LEED or Earth Advantage certified, which requires the project to sort of be evaluated and reviewed on a variety of sort of environmental, like it's a whole certification process. So I'm not as detailed, so we could bring in Cassie if you had a lot more detailed questions about that. And then they also had interest in incentives and public benefit requirements that would support, transportation investments by developers in transit and ped bike infrastructure in particular, any solar investments by a developer, stormwater management, and then even, water-wise or native landscaping. And that's also been something that the neighborhood associations have been sort of requesting or really interested in as ways to incentivize native, pollinator-friendly, water-wise landscaping. And I think there's sort of a balance to strike between what should be more just an amendment to our landscaping code versus what we could do with this program that we'll need to monitor as we move forward as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've heard from the work group as far as how to structure our public benefit eligibility criteria for this program. Because it has a lot of how we structure that has a lot of impact on how much exemption we would offer, and just a lot of the program, how we would structure the program. And so what we heard from the work group is we presented to them how the 4 different Oregon cities that have this program structure their public benefit requirements. And as I mentioned before, sort of Salem and Cottage Grove have a list of public benefits, and just one of them needs to be met in order to be eligible for their MUPT program. Newport is a little bit of a harder program to meet the requirements for. So they require that the development have an energy efficiency component and provide a certain percentage of the units at either deed restricted, affordable, or middle income price ranges. And then Eugene's program is very hard for a development to meet. So they have 7 public benefit criteria. All 7 must be met. And it's a pretty detailed and complicated application process that I personally would not want to manage. So it's just a lot harder to meet the program. And I think that's because their program is eligible in kind of stronger development market than what we're seeing in Bend for the type of development that they're trying to incentivize. What we would kind of our base recommendation for how we would structure a MUPT program here in Bend is that we would require the development to have 3 or more residential units, that it would be a multi-story project, so over 2 stories, that if the project were located in the core area on what we've identified as main streets, that 30% of the ground floor of that development would need to be non-residential or commercial uses. We would prohibit short-term vacation rentals as part of this program. And then, so 2 of the city's programs that we've reviewed in the state of Oregon require that the developer submit sort of a pro forma in order to demonstrate that they have a financial need for this exemption program. And so the way that works is there's a third party pro forma reviewer that the city contracts with to review pro formas of any of the developments that apply for the exemption. And that's something that we would recommend that our program include. And that's a staff recommendation. The work group hasn't really weighed in on that quite yet. And then the development would need to provide a minimum number of public benefits from a list, but there would be certain priority public benefits that we would really try to require as part of the program. And I'll get into how we would structure that. And then in response to the work group's desire to sort of tailor eligibility criteria, we would identify sort of stronger market areas. So the central west side area near OSU Cascades, as well as the Core Pine area, we feel have stronger market potential than what we're hearing from developments that are trying to make projects work in the Bend Central District, East Downtown, and the Inner Highway 20 Greenwood opportunity areas. And so the eligibility criteria would be harder to meet in this sort of red zone B than it would be in the green zones. And so so we would structure that with the number of priority and minimum number of criteria that you would need to meet would be, higher in that zone B than in the zone A. And we're still working through the exact details of how many eligibility criteria we would require. And that really depends on kind of this next slide of what that list of public benefit criteria that we would have. So you can see to the left, there's sort of priority public benefits that we're identifying are a higher priority for our community versus sort of these additional public benefits. And we're, again, still working through how many of the priority public benefits would we require for zone B versus zone A, and then how many requirements overall would the project need to meet. And so just wanted to kind of give you an update of where we're currently at with trying to tailor the eligibility requirements based on sort of market conditions, and let you know there's still work to be done, but wanted to get a check-in on just how you're feeling about structuring the program in different ways based on the kind of geographic and market conditions of the city.
I guess my question for that is, how do you update that if market conditions change? Right. So what's the frequency of coming back to this code and saying we need to change it, or is that going to be built into a check back every 2 years or something like that?
I think as in particular for this program, because it is more exemptions for market rate developments, typically we would either build in sort of an annual review or sort of annual update to council on the program, and maybe biannual check-ins, but that's definitely something that I think we still want to work through with the work group. And then we will talk about in like a few slides just whether we consider program caps, and that could be a point where when we hit a certain dollar amount or unit amount, we sort of pause the program until we do another check-in with council. We stop accepting applications until we check back in with you, and we have that discussion about, hey, is this exemption program too easy to meet now, right? Or is it still having its intended effect, or have we gotten the development ball rolling in a certain area, and do we need to reconsider the requirements?
So, yes, we can use this to incentivize early adopters to, get folks into the market right now, and then take it away at any time. At any moment, it can come back to council, and council can say, we got the desired effect, we've got all of this development happening, and so now we're going to change these incentives or take them away.
Any other comments on sort of this draft list of public benefits before I move on to the kind of next slide?
I appreciate the water-wise landscaping, but I think that should be something that we regulate and incentivize citywide, and don't necessarily see it as something to add to these, because I just think that's a baseline that we need to be working on bringing up anyway across the city. But the rest of these look really good to me.
Councillor Campbell or Schenkelberg, any other thoughts?
Allie, I really like the art supportive facilities. That's exciting.
Great.
I would put transit on the priority side.
Okay. That's helpful feedback. Thank you all. So I'm going to go back to kind of the original questions that we posed at the beginning of the meeting. So there are sort of a couple major check-ins, and then also at, what elements do you want brought back to council with more information or more detailed discussion? And
I'll go first.
Okay, great.
Yes, all three. The nonprofit tax exemption seems the most straightforward to me, and maybe the one that doesn't need too much more time in front of council for people to understand and likely approve of. The other two maybe need to be brought back on a couple of those places where staff is still working out details and needs further direction. I think staggered implementation makes sense due to staff demands. So, I don't know how you all want to figure out, like, is the nonprofit one easiest to put in? Should we get that in place and then kind of put our head down on the harder ones? Or is the need so great that we want to get the MUPD figured out first before we do the other ones? So I would look to staff to kind of give us direction on that. And then I do want to be pretty cautious with the exemption programs in the core TIF. And I think the way to do that is to look at a cap or timeline or something to do a check-in and see, okay, have we incentivized what we wanted to incentivize, and now we need to make this program harder or remove it, because the whole point of the TIF is to generate that money to be put back in. And so for exempting people, we're losing a little bit of that. So I do want to be really cautious with that.
Okay. Thanks, Councilor Keebler.
Which one, or was it all that only apply to improvements on the property, not the property itself?
That's the multiple unit property tax exemption. So the exemption itself only applies to improvements, not land. Then, yeah, and the nonprofit would apply to both improvements and land. And then I think we're still trying to clarify on middle income if it applies to both. I think we think it applies to both, but it's something we need to double check.
Okay, so yes, I am concerned and want to be cautious. Yes. Program elements do I want brought back to council? I don't know.
That's fine. And then Councilor Schenkelberg, if you have any thoughts on any of these questions.
I just would like to echo what Councilor Campbell and Councilor Keebler said. I'm excited about all three. I think implementation makes the most sense because we have, they're really, really big projects that's going to take time and energy, and also very excited about them. Yeah, I do feel a little bit worried around the TIF. And like, I think that we'll be able to figure it out. It's just going to take some time and navigation. Yeah, I mean, the caps are complicated because we haven't, we're still trying to figure out what they're going to look like. So perceivably, yes. And then as we continue to navigate, like you said earlier, Allie, that will change. And kind of being brought back is probably just more conversation about the more complex programs, so we can continue to understand them more in depth. And I also want to recognize that we've learned about them in like 2 other meetings, and I'm still conceptualizing them for sure.
Great. We do have kind of preliminary recommendations on caps if you're interested in seeing that. So kind of what we're thinking is, and I just have done this for the MUPD program so far, but if we were incentivizing sort of 500 units, that would translate to sort of a range between $15 to $20 million cap for the program. And that's over a 10-year period, right? So you'd exempt up to 20 million in a 10-year exemption. And so that really translates kind of for how it impacts the taxing districts is sort of a maximum of $1.5 to $2 million annually. And if you wanted to increase that to 750 units is what we're really trying to incentivize, that would be a $22 to $30 million cap. And we're still working, we need to do more research on the middle income to make a more informed recommendation about what that unit kind of goal or cap would be. And then for nonprofit, we would recommend that there's no cap.
Fantastic.
How long is this meeting supposed to go?
30 to 11, but Allie, yeah, how much, do you have more information?
That's the last slide. So we have plenty more slides if you want the details, but we can save you and bring it back for more discussion later.
So I've got 35 minutes to try and understand that MUPD bullet point.
Well, what I would ask for in future meetings for this subcommittee is like if we could get some of this stuff a couple days beforehand, that would be great. So I could read and then see the presentation and help synthesize it. And I'm sure you can send out after as well. And maybe a link also in the agenda for the public who go to this agenda or like can see the presentation and the slides and everything as well. And like the summary on the bridge and things. But I guess the other question I have is like kind of timeline. It looks like your work group is meeting again next week. And then are you going to come back to this group? Or are you going to come back to full council? What's the plan?
You pull up the schedule. So yeah, we'll go back to the work group next Monday to work through a little bit more details on especially the middle income formula and then some of the public benefit eligibility criteria. We'll be presenting to taxing districts and at their board levels over the month of March is the goal. That might bleed into April as well, but we're starting some of those board conversations March 1st. So we have the Park District scheduled March 1st, and then is it COCC on March 9th? And then the goal would be to come back to council at a work session, the first meeting in April or potentially the second meeting in April with kind of a deeper dive into some of them and we can stagger the adoption. So I think if we felt like we needed more time with MUPD, we could bring the nonprofit tax exemption to you in May for adoption and work through more details. And we could extend work group meetings longer for the other two if needed.
And hey, Allie, do you want to maybe summarize some of the questions that we're getting from the taxing districts ahead of the outreach taking place, the more formal outreach taking place with their boards?
Yeah, do you want me to go back to that slide at the beginning?
Yeah, I just want to, I know Councilor Campbell, you're involved in going to parks, so I just wanted you to be prepared ahead of time so that you're aware of the questions and you had access to staff to kind of work through those issues or concerns.
So I actually did think of a question instead of just help me understand MUPD better. So the question I thought of, so in the TIF, the taxing districts can say no. We've got to have more than half saying yes, and the school district is so big that they plus anyone else are enough to be more than half, and the plus anyone else can be us. So as long as we say yes and the school says yes to the TIF, then we're okay. Is that true for for these three other as well, where we've got to get essentially permission from most of the taxing districts, and most can be ourselves and Ben Lapine?
Yeah, so with actually the taxing districts don't really have a say. They get to consult and confer on the plan, but they never had a formal vote in the formation of any of our urban renewal districts, which is important to keep in mind when we're talking to them about.
We could have done it and just make everybody angry. We could just do all of this without even talking to them. Just surprise.
Yeah, the state statute for urban renewal requires that you send them the plan, you present to them, and they have an opportunity to consult and confer on the plan before it's adopted. But there is no formal vote that they get unless you're including a project that is a public facility, so like a government building. Then the taxing districts can vote on whether or not to include that project. With the exemption programs, that's urban renewal and tax increment financing districts. With the exemption programs, all three that we're recommending or that are being recommended to move forward require that 51% of the tax levy, so any of these that make up 51%, have to approve by resolution the program or the project in order for, and then if 51% approve, all taxing districts are then required to participate in the exemption. So it really comes down to the school district and the city. If we approve, then all the taxing districts are then required to participate in the exemption program.
So I kind of got it right. I just got it right for the wrong programs. So all of the three we're talking about today, yes, we need 51% to approve by resolution.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
And if I may, I think we have tried with the existing property tax exemption that we have on the books right now to sort of formalize a procedure with development to make sure that everybody gets to weigh in, because we were seeing some folks just going to the school district and then us, and the other districts were feeling left out. And so what I have asked folks to do, even though I don't know that I can require this, I've tried really hard, and so far they have done this, is go to parks first, go to the county first, and then sort of save the school district for the last one before they come to us, so that you all as counselors are making the decision to formalize that 100% exemption or simply the city's portion of the exemption. So we're trying to sort of cover that through procedures, if that makes sense, even though we can't change how this works at the state level.
And this is that list, sort of summarized list of some of the taxing district outreach that we've done so far. And they did just recently sort of come together and send a formal list of questions to staff that we'll make sure to send to council. We're still working on answering those questions, but our goal is to work to develop more formal responses to all of the questions that they came up with, and make sure that you're all aware of what those questions are and their responses.
I think a lot of what I saw in the theme of from the taxing district is really understanding the need. I know you all, it's a big focus of council goals is increasing affordable housing. I think some of the other taxing districts aren't quite as much aware of that significant need as that foundation to really move forward with these projects or exemptions.
And then I'll also add, in terms of just conversations with developers, and Allie can jump in here as well, their performers are getting super tight with inflation, supply chain issues, material cost. So these type of financial programs may become more critical here in the near future, especially with what we're seeing in the market, and trying to help kind of pioneer and get some of these projects out of the ground, out of the gate, because it's becoming more and more challenging as the market conditions are rapidly changing. But we know the demand's there, trying to make projects pencil, and this is one of the tools that may help to get some of these first projects out of the gate. Any other questions? Because I'm sure Allie and the team can go into great depths on a bunch of these programs if you want to go there. Barb?
I'm still, my brain's on the floor being the land that there's no exemption on taxes for the property itself.
Allie, do you have a graph? One of those, this might be a good time for one of your
Yeah.
graphs.
Okay.
I don't know how much of this is just my curious brain, you know, trying to understand this at a level far beyond what I need to actually just say, yes, go forward, make this happen.
No, Councilor, these are good
So
questions.
conceptually, it seems to me that the floor for the TIF, what do you call that? There's a
frozen base.
Thank you. The frozen base. The frozen base is kind of essentially that property value that, you know, in the core area, even if it's not actually just open property, you know, there are properties where the thing on top is, you know, worse than no value. You're actually going to have to remove whatever's there in order to develop. So the frozen base is already almost the same as the property value, right? So then it's whatever they put on top of that, that the exemptions apply to. Okay.
So I looked at 3 different case studies. The first one is a 2-story, 10-unit project in the Bend Central District. The Brooks Resources Project, 140 units, 5-story mixed-use project. And then the Killian Pacific, you know, 6-story, 300+ units project. So we've looked at this, how it would impact kind of 3 case study developments. And what we found is that the exemption on improvements in all 3 of those examples leads to enough of the same frozen base being collected and distributed to the taxing districts. But depending on the level of exemption that you offer on improvements, and this is where like everybody's head is going to start spinning, it depends on how much TIF you draw in, right? And so I'll go back to the Brooks Resources example. If you offer them 100% exemption on improvements, the level of exemption that we offer them over that 10-year period is $4.5 million, which is twice as much as their SDCs, just for comparison. And in that 10-year time period, we would only collect $580,000 of TIF in addition to the frozen base being collected and distributed to the taxing districts. So you can see, depending on sort of the scale of how much of the exemption you offer them, you increase the amount of TIF that you would collect over time. So this is really merits like a much deeper dive with you all, but this is sort of the level that staff is looking at to evaluate what are the future impacts to our TIF district.
So Councilor Campbell, and when I see your hand up, hang on, I just want to make sure, look at, do you want the graph on the right? Because Allie can describe, does that make sense to you in terms of what's, okay, I just want to make sure you're tracking that. Lynn?
The piece that I wanted to point out was that on that graph on the right, that little green line at the bottom, that's the frozen base. So I'm thinking about what Brian Rankin always calls our base case when we're talking about development, right? This is existing status, and that green line isn't changing regardless of what we do, right? So that's going to continue. So the immediate impact to taxing districts is not going to be significant. The impact comes later, right? They're going to continue to see the revenue. And if we're successful, then we get that big sort of greenish blob. If we're completely unsuccessful and this all fails, that green line still stays exactly the way it does. And that's the piece, I think, that for council and that the other taxing districts aren't necessarily seeing that big picture, that guess what, your frozen base is remaining in this MUFB program. That's the piece that isn't changing. If we're successful, we get all this big green blob. If we're unsuccessful, we still got that green line in place. And so that's, I think, the piece that we need to do, staff need to do a better job of explaining to the taxing districts, is that you're not losing, we may gain, if that makes sense. So that's sort of how I'm trying to figure out how to frame that more appropriately in an honest way, because we don't want to tell them that there won't be impacts at all, but still remembering that frozen base and the fact that the land improvements are not, or the land itself is not getting exempted. They're getting that now, they will get that in the future. We just have the potential to greatly increase that. It's just going to be delayed gratification on that. if that makes sense. So I don't know if that helps, but I did want to point out, because I don't know that we've hammered that green line as well as we could when we're talking
Right.
to others.
Right.
And then and then it's trying to find that sweet spot, as Ali's kind of alluding to, of, well, really, what does the developer need to get their project moving? Because we don't want to put too much money on the table. You're just trying to thread that needle, which is what Ali's trying to work with the group on, is trying to figure out where are we and where should we set the bumpers on this program. So we're seeing the net benefit of what we're trying to achieve, but not also giving away money that could be better utilized in the TIF and build improvements or other things in the TIF.
And I think those public benefits, that's where that really comes into play of, okay, we're offering you this pretty, in some cases, pretty large exemption, but we're then at the table able to ask for things that we need in return as a community. So we want to see more energy efficient buildings. We want to see childcare facilities being developed as part of these developments. And without this exemption program, we have no leverage to ask for anything, right? And so what are those public benefits that we want to try to incentivize and sort of have some tool to ask for them and be at the table to even have the ability to ask?
I also think this is a great tool to start to incentivize the pioneers out there again to get, because basically activity breeds activity, but getting that activity started is the hardest part in these areas. So how do we get that ball rolling? And then when do we start to pull back on those incentives? That's the other, that's all, again, trying to thread that needle of where does the city want to position itself throughout, not only, we're not going to stay consistent through the entire project, but where do we want to be in the start, in the middle, and then when it's really rolling at the end, we can reposition ourselves in terms of these programs. But it's a different question you're asking at each stage of the, of the life cycle of the project.
So it seems to me that the $1 million question is, which incentives are there incentives that are incentives for those other taxing districts? So we want to incentivize you taxing district having all these new customers. So, your frozen base is there. If absolutely nothing the whole thing revolves around this idea that nothing has changed since I moved to town 30 years ago in this area. The base has essentially been frozen by the market, and now it's frozen because of this TIF program. So
it's really that long-term, you got to think long-term in these programs, because once the urban renewal sunsets,
right,
then the whole block comes back to the taxing districts.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of, you don't just focus on the now, it's more, but you also have to understand there's impacts to services and facilities.
Right.
Like
So that's what I'm saying. Is there anything in that impact for services piece that is, right now, while the base is frozen, before their tax rate just goes from frozen base to, now we have money. So, that's where my brain is now. What could be on that ground floor that the school district needs to have in the core district that COCC might want to have in the core district, that the parks, do you see what I'm saying? My brain is, speaking of reinventing the wheel, what is there anything else we could have on that list that makes it easier for those taxing districts to say yes to that frozen revenue, even though we're bringing them more customers and more need for service? So that's just kind of, my brain, if we could think of that. Ooh, wouldn't that be amazing?
So Barb, what comes to mind for me is that the Bend Parks and Rec cannot hire enough people to run their programs.
Yeah.
And that's at current levels of service. And that's because there's no affordable childcare. We have affordable housing and a housing crisis. So if any of our priority incentives are helping with that, I think that's helping out these taxing districts meet the level of service that they currently have and can anticipate in the future. And so I think there's that. And then I think some of these things align with goals like, incentivizing building open space into the design of your development and, creating public places that people want to want to be in promoting arts, I think that aligns with some of what Ben Parks does. So I think we can definitely point to this list that Allison put up earlier and kind of translate it to the problems that they're having right now and can anticipate if there is increased services.
That's a great point, Melanie. So, what I'm asking for is already there. Number one, just the housing. That's what everybody needs. That's what the Parks District needs. That's what the school district needs. Everybody needs a housing that is more affordable, in particular for our own employees and their own employees. Yeah, that's a great point, Melanie, that, those things are already in here. I should just be thinking about how to, explain all of this to the Parks District next week.
And we can add, based on the comments that we got from the Park District, we can add recreation supportive facilities as well as art supportive facilities. That's on Salem's list of public benefits.
Okay.
So we can add that to the list. And then the themes that I think that we heard from them was affordable housing, childcare facilities also being a priority for those districts. But we can specifically ask the boards at those meetings what public benefits they would be most interested in incorporating.
The meeting rooms, talk to the library district about meeting rooms. They're spending millions and millions in Bend. So many millions, really. It's about meeting rooms is what we need in Bend. So, okay.
One other point on that, and that's sort of the overall balancing act that we have. So we have talked to you all, staff have talked to counselors about sort of the drivers behind all of this work. What's in our control? What are the sort of external factors that are pushing on these developers and creating these needs that we're identifying now? And that's another element that these taxing districts asked us to look at is a tax exemption program really the right mechanism, or do we have other things within our control to help? And so Allie kind of touched on that and did want to put that out there. I do know that, there are limited tools, frankly, as you all know, that we do have. SDCs are one of them, fees are another. All of those things are things that we are working through in other contexts. And some of you, of course, are very familiar with the discussions we've had about SDC exemptions for affordable housing with other taxing districts as well. So just keep that in mind that is something that staff are continuing to work through and look at is, what are the right balancing acts? Are we going to get to the right place? Should we be looking at SDCs in a different way, for instance? And so really trying to model out that work behind the scenes as well. And we are taking that feedback to heart. I don't know what we'll come up with that could alleviate all concerns. There's no perfect answers, but do want to point out that we are in fact looking at that and trying to find ways to find that win-win for everybody.
Yeah, we know that some cities couple tax exemptions with SDC financing. So you can start to operationalize. So if you give a tax exemption, then they kind of backfill that cost with financing the SDCs over a longer term. And then when the financing runs out, that's when the tax incentive comes back. So their operating cost kind of remains at the same level throughout the life cycle of a building. And that's what I think Lynn's alluding to. Is like there are a lot of times these can couple together with other programs to make it work right. That's what we've seen in other areas. Again, more discussions, on how we're going to bring all that back together. But just want to let the council know that's sometimes these don't work in isolation. They do work with other programs. Kathy, I see your hand up.
Well, since Lynn opened up the discussion to something broader than what we're discussing today, I just wanted to put out there to you the thought of redefining levels of affordability. Right now, we have up to 60% and up to 80%. But my understanding is for the affordable housing funds that you are allowed to go to 100%. And some of our experience with Habitat for Humanity is that people are coming in at like 83% and having to ask us to give on that. And the reality is now, everything has ratcheted up so much that 60% and 80%, I think, need to go to 80 and 100 personally. And I just want to mention that and put it out there to be considered, because if we can help, it just gives us more tools and it's more realistic for what the reality is right now. So just wanted to mention that.
So we have about 10 minutes of available time left. Does the counselors have any additional questions around this?
Could I just make one comment about your last comment, Russ? About, that balance. We are trying, we are pushing at the market, trying to get it to tip without, giving away too much. I would just like to make the comment that we have been pushing on this central area as long, since the UGB expansion. Immediately after we approved the UGB, we went back in and made code changes to the central area. I remember 2 years ago, counselor who shall remain nameless, believing that we had pushed too far just with the code changes that we had made or something, and that we were already giving away too much to developers. So, I would just like to make that point that I think we have looked under all of the couch cushions for incentives that don't actually have money on the table for developers. That, those were code changes saying that you can build taller, you can build more dense, you can do it right. Then we actually put money on the table as far as the TIF goes. That TIF financing is very much putting money on the table for developers, because we're taking away what might be their offsite improvements. We're taking away, we're finding other funding for the sewer that needs to be done. So that's already in a way, putting money. And now we're, really saying, and here's a little more, actual money on the table for you, incentive, as far as we're taking away the tax incentive. So, I think we've looked under all of the couch cushions. I think we've explored all of our options for how to move this market without actually saying you can have a tax exemption. So, for me, I guess I'm just rehearsing for next week with the Parks District,
And I can add, just from a staff perspective, every part of that conversation, projects become more and more real. And we are, as Allie just pointed out, we got 3 examples that she just went through with those with those graphs. Those are real discussions we're having that we weren't having 2 years ago. They were more like, well, maybe we'll build something. Now they are really trying to figure out how to pull the trigger on something. So like the market conditions in terms of the supply and demand seem to be, working. And now they're becoming more real. And I agree with you. I think we just we're continuing to have those discussions. And as we make each one of these moves and set right policy, we're getting closer and closer. And hopefully we're getting very close to that tipping point where projects will actually start to pull permit and start to move. That's where we were getting very close. And then inflation, supply chain issues, and COVID, that kind of stalled a little bit, because we know a lot of the developers they've gotten their first construction numbers back, like real numbers now from contractors that they're looking at, and they're coming in substantially higher than what they thought were good estimated costs just 12 months ago.
30% higher.
Yeah. And so every developer I talk to right now, they're like, well, if I can get the costs and they can hold, that's and my performer will work. Second is, can I actually get the materials here on a timeline that I can actually build the building? And then can I get the workforce there to make sure I can install the materials? Those are the biggest factors. And a lot of developers we're talking to now, the time and cost, they're dealing with issues that typically they don't deal with. Like most of the time they can stay in their contingencies. They're having a really hard time now with active projects. Or you hear things like the windows were supposed to show up next week. Now it's end of April. We just got word, or something like that. And that can, as you can imagine, throw a project into a tailspin. So that's what the development side of the equation, that's what they're trying to figure out. At the same time, we're looking at these incentive programs.
I just wanted to give a final comment just to put this in context of kind of Oregon land use law and also the climate friendly rules that are coming from the state. In both of those things, so we are already incentivized and and push to grow up and in and to urbanize our core. And the new rules are going to be even more of that. And so I think we are doing the right thing here by getting ahead of that, figuring out what local tools that we control and can adjust as we go, we want to put in place to already be meeting some of those goals that the state is going to require of us anyway. So I'm glad that we're exploring this, and hopefully we can get it done this year and figure out how it's going to work exactly and work best for Bend. So thanks, staff, for working hard on all of these different options.
And thank you, Kathy. You, man, how many were you in for the whole hearing last night? No. Good.
I couldn't stand it. I was an hour and a half, and I finally texted Lynn and said, I'm bailing. I can't take it anymore.
I bailed when they took a recess to stretch their legs. Yeah.
We stayed for the whole game, just so you know.
Yeah, I know you did.
Yeah. So thank you, Kathy. I appreciate your feedback and appreciate you, pushing for that middle income. You are absolutely right. We are still missing that portion, and it's all it all feeds into this homelessness crisis that we are also experiencing.
Yeah.
So,
we need more of everything.
That's exactly right. The only thing we don't need are more $1 million homes with incredible views of the mountains. We got plenty of those.
Well, you might like the taxes from that, but
oh man. Empty house tax.
I'm hoping you'll look into that.
Empty house tax. Empty house tax.
So state law. But thank you all for all the feedback on the property tax exemptions. We'll talk state law another day, maybe. Yep. Under Eric's direction. Really appreciate the feedback on this. This has been incredibly helpful for us for determining our next steps. And really excited to kind of regroup with our larger staff team and determine what our next steps are, but look forward to bringing back some additional information at the next opportunity. Thank you all.
So thank you. So we've got just any closing questions or remarks from council before we wrap?
No, Russ, we're done. Russ, no. Thank you, but no, let's go.
I have to put it on it. I just have to put it on. Right? So Barb, do you want to move?
Do not give me the chance to ask any more questions. No, Melanie is right.
No, he was trying to prompt the move to adjourn.
Yeah,
move to adjourn.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
This morning. Have a great day.